We're having the meeting today, right?
Yeah, Krob is out of town.
No, I was gonna say he's on PTO, isn't he?
Yeah. Hang on a sec. I can get the let me get the agenda template up here. Okay. All right, I just dropped the a new template in there for today's meeting. You guys can put yourselves, mark yourselves as present if you wish. So it does not seem we have an agenda already. So while people are doing that, if anyone would like to put some updates in or bring up some topics they'd like to discuss, we can certainly do that. I guess I should follow protocol. Is anyone here new to the call?
I think I might be new to the call. I'm just calling in. My name's Andres Orby, and I was a senior at NJT. I've now since graduated and kind of looking to see any best practices for open source development.
All right. Did you say Andres was your name?
Yes, Andres.
Andres, welcome to the group.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to introduce themselves? My camera's not working. There we go.
Andres, man, congratulations.
All right.
Thank you.
So that being taken care of, I guess we will just go down through the project updates. So I don't see David on the call. Jay, anyone, do you have any updates you'd like to give on the various subgroups, SIGs, committees, activities that are going on?
Yeah, the DE&I SIG meets right after this one. We're gonna be ramping up again. We had a brief break for the summit. So this will be, I believe it's our first one back since the summit. So we get a chance to talk about that, talk about our 30, 60, 90 or 90, 60, 120, however we're calling it. We'll talk about that kind of stuff there too. We have some stuff coming up with Alpha Omega when it comes to the college outreach stuff that we're doing there. So exciting times in the next hour.
All right, and I will encourage anyone who's interested in working with that group or participating, please go ahead and join those calls. I'm sure they appreciate any additional help that they can get. Thanks, Jay.
A quick update on the source control management project. So we met last week, and what we're going to be working on next, Jay is going to be presenting, I think, an update to the TAC on May 30th for the best practices working group. And we are trying to see what we can do to kind of get that into like a good update. So what we're working on is that Noam with Legidify had actually gone ahead and put together like a nice PR to talk about GitLab and GitHub. And we want to round out that documentation with adding more context. So working on a PR to get that done. We're also thinking about what we want to do in terms of the roadmap in the future. Anything related to editorial work or things related to operations. And we also want to get this in the hands of open source program officers who might be one of the audiences for this guide that we're working on. So that's kind of like the next thing. And we might present it in front of some of like the end users group potentially in an upcoming meeting this week. Or in front of, say, like the To-Do group, which is another Linux Foundation community of practice for OSPOs. So we're meeting kind of like off cycle this week to review a PR for some of the editorial content to get it ready for those other review folks, as well as to get it in a good shape for May 30th to talk about it, so that Crow can talk about it.
Thank you, Christine. I tried to take a couple, excuse me, a couple notes while you and Jay were both talking. If you'd like to add or correct anything that I might have typed, please feel free to do so. Any questions for Jay or Christine on the updates that they were able to give? Let's see who else is online here. Does anyone else have any updates or statuses or questions that they would like to share?
I can update from the memory safety SIG that we have a pull request that Nell started for rephrasing some of the mobilization plan text. We plan to review it, I guess, this Thursday in the meeting. So if everyone wants to join, we'll be happy to see you.
Thank you, Abhishek. Appreciate that.
I have one, David Wheeler.
Hey, David's here.
Yeah. So just a minor one on the best practices. We're currently working to replace a couple of the encryption libraries that we've used. We did an update on our framework, which now includes some encryption mechanisms, and basically we want to switch over to that because that way it should be much easier to update going forward. We've had some updating problems in the past, so it's one of those, when we're done, no one will know, but it'll be easier to maintain it in the future.
Cool. Sounds good. Thank you very much for that update. So as you can tell, we're kind of in ad hoc mode here since Crow is on PTO. We do not have an agenda. So again, I will invite anyone who has any topics that they would like to discuss with the working group to please raise those now. We've got a fair number of folks online that I'm sure will be happy to talk about anything that's interesting to anyone.
I could talk about something that's not entirely related to this working group, so people may not have heard about.
Feel free.
All right. Give me a half second. So, by show of hands, has everybody here heard about the proposal that I'm putting forward called the Great Repository Audit? Okay, I got one person with a thumb up. That's about it. All right, so this is something that I'm pitching to the it's a SIG now under the it will be a SIG under the Securing Artifact Repositories Working Group, and maybe if funded by Alpha Omega, I'm not entirely certain. So taking a step back, my fundamental postulate for this whole thing is major artifact servers, right? PyPy, Ruby Gems, Maven Central, all those major artifact servers in all these different industries have likely never had a pen test performed against them. And the reason that I posit that is because what is the kind of the forcing function that forces you to get a pen test, right? Either you've got regulations in some respect, or your software is being purchased, right? You have a piece of software that's being bought, and you have a customer that says, we're not going to buy your software unless you have a pen test, right? And you can show us that pen test, because the security team is like part of the acquisition process of your customer. Because artifact servers, major artifact servers in the industry, Maven Central, Gradle Plugin Portal, PyPy, Ruby Gems, like all these artifact servers, NuGet, NPM, all these things are available for free, right? You can just consume them. And they've become pervasively used in our industry. I posit that because they've never had an economic forcing function applied to them, most of them have not had a pen test performed against them. And so as the OpenSSF, we're kind of focused on this topic of like security of the supply chain. And we're talking about topics like Salsa and SigStore and like all the other things. And I think that we may be running before we walked. We may be building all this infrastructure in the industry and pushing for these security measures without having kind of ensured that the bedrock we're standing on is secure. And so the idea behind the Great Repository Audit is that the OpenSSF and Alpha Omega and potentially a bunch of places come together and actually fund pen tests of major artifact servers. So let me switch off my phone and I'll send a link to this proposal in the chat, unless somebody wants to beat me to it. It's linked in the Securing Software Repositories Working Group. So if somebody wants to grab that link, I will be right there. Just give me a half second. I'm just going to switch to my let me switch to the other Zoom client and I will be back, and then we can talk about this if people want to talk about it, or you can tell me to shut up and go away.
I won't tell you to shut up and go away. I will say that it sounds like this is more an FYI for us on this call of work from another working group. Is that a fair, or at least a proposed work? Is that fair?
Yeah, you said it would be implemented from another working group.
Right.
Yeah, that's the high level, right? It's tied to best practices because it's the best practice for running an artifact server, but this is mostly best practices for open source. So, but I just, different group of people, there was an opening at the end of the call. It seemed like nobody had anything to talk about, so I figured I'd throw it in there.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to that URL. Going to slip it into the notes.
Yeah, let me track it down real fast.
So if I may interject here, just one thing, Jonathan, you started with the premise that because open source is free, there's not been any forcing function to have pen testing. I mean, this is clearly not always the case, right? I mean, there are, I think, several in the Linux Foundation, especially, it's fairly common for projects that will run to do pen testing. And, I've been involved in Hyperledger, for instance, and it's kind of like it comes along with the project life cycle. When a project has a first major release, we do security testing. And it does cost quite a bit of money, but it's supported by the membership. And so I think you're probably right anyway, that there are many of those packages available in those registries do not or have not been tested. So I'm not arguing with the need. There may still be a need. I just wanted to question a little bit the premise you started from.
That's interesting. I presume that these are larger. I mean, one result of this thing may be, oh, hey, actually, everybody has been pen tested. Wow. Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's like awesome, right? We didn't realize it, but it has happened. So the projects that you've been engaged in have been funded through nonprofits primarily? Or where's the funding come from for those?
Well, no, I mean,
That depends.
it's like OpenSSF, right? I mean, they are funded by membership.
Yeah.
And you're right, they are not small packages. They're typically big chunks of software. I'm sure CNCF does that too, right? For Kubernetes.
Yep.
David might know.
Yeah, I certainly don't know of all. I mean, we've actually got a repository called Security Reviews of every security audit report that we can find for open source software projects, which won't claim as a full list. So lots of people do pen test security audits related to things for a variety of reasons. I mean, it really just comes down to, did somebody decide it was important and find a way to fund it? But you know what? So I'm not sure I'm not sure I always buy the premise, but just because whether or not a premise is true, the conclusion can still be true. And I absolutely do agree with the conclusion, which, Yeah, P may or may not imply Q, but Q is still true. So
Yeah, I agree with you, David. I think what I would, what the practical action item I would take from what I'm saying is merely don't assume there's not been any pen testing, and it might be worth asking people if they, for a given package, whether they have done any.
No, yeah. So I have. So like I originally posed this, during the open source summit in Vancouver, and was talking to like Brian Fox, and Brian Fox like did some digging through his company and came back with, oh hey, actually we have had a pen test for Maven Central, right? So and I presume that NPM probably had an audit done at some point during the acquisition, right? Because they were bought by Microsoft, right? Whether that happens regularly, whether that's happened recently. I also come at this from a personal point of view of personal experience. Just having worked with package managers in the past, they tend, or at least in my experience, they're like these critical bit of infrastructure for the ecosystem, but they're not making the company running it any money. It's usually a cost sink. And so it's kind of like, as long as it keeps working, we're happy. As long as it keeps running, we're happy, right?
Right.
And that may not be true, and then there's other organizations like PyPy, right, which is community run, and there's a bit of a difference there. So, but at least from the corporate side, in my experience, it's a cost sink, and it's not really often the priority because it's not making the company any money.
Yeah, I mean, I will observe that there's a very, very large set of proprietary software that hasn't undergone a pen test.
Right.
So I think that's a much broader, simpler statement. Most software has not been reviewed for security. You can just put the period right there, and most services haven't either. And let's go make sure that, since these are important, let's make sure that they have gotten a serious look. So.
This the scope of this test also includes a proposal for also trying to pay for red team engagements too against these artifact server, the organizations running these artifact servers, which may be a harder sell and also involves much more heavily collaborating with those organizations, because those have scopes that are when you start in dealing with social engineering potential employees or employers or organizations, you have even more careful scopes you need to deal with. But it is included as a potential, like, hey, we should make sure that like the people who own the keys to these major artifact servers that are supplying the industry's open source software have a certain, that they understand, social engineering attacks as well are a valid target against them, given their place in the supply chain. Yeah. So there is a SIG that has been, or SIG meeting that's been added. It's going to be every Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern, for every Thursday where there is not already a securing software repositories meeting. So if you'd like to participate in the conversation about securing open source software repositories and trying to get them pen tested, come join the SIG call, and we'll push forward on this proposal.
All right, Jonathan, thanks for sharing. Thank you, David, for taking all those notes. Much appreciated. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to discuss today? Jeffrey has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, good afternoon. David, anything to share on the outline that you started on the toolchain initiative?
The Sterling toolchain. No, I was at at the open source summit. I guess it was a week ago, and then I decided to get ill. So, so I need to get. I'm not sure I actually have the pen on that, but I know that there's been some efforts to try to take the governing board idea and the various and the mobilization plan and TAC. I tried to circle the square, and other people have made comments too. I think the main thing that I would say, other people have said this too, is in general, people aren't going to replace their tool. They have an existing tool chain. They're not going to replace it. So what we need to do is identify the missing functionalities and find ways to not just, hey, just replace, but also plugins or other mechanisms to so that people don't have to just do whole swath replacements.
Have you formed any opinions about some of the various SBOM generation tools that are
No,
out in open source as to their various levels of performance?
No, in fact, the SBOM Everywhere group, which I believe is meeting next, one of the things that there's is on their list of to-dos is to try to do that evaluation. I don't think that's moving as quickly as I'd like, but that seems to me the first step is before proposing anything, knowing which ones make any sense. And my understanding is, all have strengths and weaknesses. How's that? Is that?
Or like all the children of Wobegon, Lake Wobegon, they're all above average.
I'm not sure that I'm going to sign up for that.
Well, it's a mathematical impossibility. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. So, so that's the current status there.
Thank you for that, David. All right. Does anyone have anything else that they would like to ask or discuss with the group?
This is probably just to make people aware. I'm going through some of our GitHub repos and trying to condense things into a single source of truth type of thing, because we have a few community members that were eager to start helping and they weren't sure where to start. What are certain groups working on? What are the certain groups' goals, times, places, where are the notes, things like that, because we have a lot of different repos on GitHub. And so I'm starting to condense them into this one community repo. So the community has a place to go and start, rather than having to look through the 61 different repos plus external ones and things. So if you feel free to contribute to that repo, pull request, welcome, and everything else. Just trying to get it so it's easier for people to kind of onboard into helping.
Thank you for that update, Amanda. Single sources of truth are always a good thing. All right, I will try to pull teeth one more time. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to bring up for people's information, question, discussion, comments?
Oh, okay, I got another one. Just this is a little bit old, but I should be going around to all the working groups and letting them know about this, because I told the TAC that I would do this. The Vulnerability Disclosure Working Group has proposed and has been accepted by the TAC a OpenSSF outbound vulnerability disclosure policy, which describes how we as the OpenSSF, if anybody wants to speak for and represent the OpenSSF, has a vulnerability they want to disclose to an organization or a repository or project, the policy that we will use for those disclosures. So if you find any vulnerabilities and you want to disclose them under the OpenSSF banner, or you want to, there's also a model outbound vulnerability disclosure policy that if you don't want to use the OpenSSF name, but you want to just adopt that, that is also present. Send a link to that in the chat. It will, we're trying to find a home for it, what repository it will live in. So yeah, that's just the TAC ratified this policy, so it is policy for the OpenSSF. David, curious, I know this is not entirely related, but I guess it is kind of a best practice. Is there any updates on the incoming disclosure stuff for open source repositories. You wanted to make it general for everybody, but there was also
Yeah,
a
no,
topic-
no, I've been sick this past week, so I haven't done anything yet there yet.
PG, I've done my due diligence. I've told you there's a policy.
You have informed us, yes.
You have been informed.
Yes, but you know what? I think in the end, we need to get that posted on the OpenSSF website.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think the TAC has proposed that we put it in. There's a repository called Foundation, OpenSSF/Foundation, which has policies in it. That's the one that Bob Calloway proposed that we put it in, but I've emailed the TAC twice now saying where should I put this document, and I've gotten no responses other than Bob Calloway's. So
No, that's not true, John. There's an issue open and some discussions with people saying, oh, maybe we should put it there, maybe we should put it there.
oh, where's this issue?
I just saw Dustin, for instance, say, oh, maybe it should be on the website, OpenSSF, or maybe it was somebody else, but Dustin was in.
I just got 48 minutes ago. There it is.
See?
Yeah.
You have to stay on top, buddy.
Apparently. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say if it's going to be I mean, I don't think those two statements are in conflict, by the way. There's nothing wrong with an OpenSSF the OpenSSF website. You click and it jumps over to the repo for the actual contents. But you know, if it's going to be a policy, we're going to need to make it actually visible.
Yeah. Amanda, out of curiosity, is there so are there ways that we can like have a document or a policy that is written in a GitHub repo under the OpenSSF somewhere and have it mirrored to the website in such a way that any updates to the GitHub repository where that file is will get reflected to the website, or is that a manual process?
So that is my year plan, is I want to have the website be transitioned to a GitHub page. And then the GitHub pages is pulled through a GitHub action from the GitHub repo.
So each working group would have its own GitHub page, maybe?
We can condense them into one master page that's pulled from each GitHub repo from the subgroups.
I will note that the current solution, which you may hate, but is what this working group has been doing, is creating the documents on GitHub and then creating a link on the website, creating a link to the GitHub page. To the page generated by GitHub itself. And it's not GitHub pages, it's a page on GitHub, if the distinction makes any sense.
Yeah,
I mean,
in my experience, search engine optimization on GitHub repositories is terrible. Like if you Google for something, you get like, you know, GitHub doesn't, or Google does not dig into repository subdirectories to find things. So if you post it on GitHub pages, it will actually index those things though.
That doesn't matter because it's a link on the main OpenSSF website. And it's a link to, you know, it's a link to, and by the way, the trick on a markdown file on GitHub is if you add #readme, it will, when you open up the page, it will skip the header that's normally generated for a markdown file, and you immediately start seeing the actual contents. It's a hack, but it's a working hack.
Yeah, but if you're doing a search on the contents of the MD file that's in the link, then it won't find it on Google, is what I think Jonathan was saying. If it's on a GitHub page, Google will actually crawl through the contents of that markdown file as well.
Yeah, I think Google still crawls through.
It does. It just doesn't rank it highly.
Yeah.
I mean, you can definitely search for, like, if you put GitHub at the beginning of a search, it'll definitely come up for you. But it just like if we want, I presume, right, if we were to look for the vulnerability disclosure working group finder's guide or the report or the either the finder's guide or the maintainer guide, we would not be the top of the list on Google.
No, I just searched for a concise guide for evaluating open source software, and the very, very first link is the GitHub page.
With incognito or
No. Well, I didn't do it with incognito.
Yeah. I presume you are weighted because so I got something on my
because I probably show up there a lot. All right, well, all right, let's do that again. Same thing.
All right.
But of course, but to be fair, I think part of the Well, no, I think part of the reason for that is because it's a non-GitHub page linking directly to a GitHub page. So it's observing that it's not just a random page, it's something that non-GitHub pages link to.
Mm-hmm.
So Jonathan, that's on the list to do that later, but first I want to get the GitHub in order so that it's pulling from the sub repositories.
Hmm.
Okay.
We're gonna have this conversation with attack. One of the just another Amanda, just aside to you. There before most of the working groups were using a GitHub plugin called security.yaml or something like that was configuring like permissions and how the repository is configured from a file in the repository. Given the permissions on that file, like that file you could modify to give yourself permissions. So if you had write permissions that are on the repository, you could give yourself admin permissions on the repository. So we disabled support for that across the organization as something that because I was like, this seems like it's escalation of privileges across anybody who's got write access to these repositories. So David, you were probably part of the original setup of that document or those things in the working groups too, right?
No.
No? Okay, well, all right. I don't know if did the TAC ever get told about that? All right, well, I'll tell the TAC then. All right, I'll tell the TAC in the TAC meeting. Okay.
Arno is gone.
All right.
We also noticed a few things unusual the other day that we resolved. Like any member being able to create repositories and things like that. So we removed that permission.
Can staff still create repositories?
So yeah, we've been on the slow moving train of going through all the GitHub repos and all the permissions to make sure that the permissions were set reasonably.
Okay.
And moving everything to basically groups, so that you
I
can
no
add
longer
somebody to a group and poof, suddenly you've got the right permissions.
I no longer have permissions to create repositories.
I send an email to operations.
All right, will do.
I haven't.
Anything.
I'm learning how to manage permissions later today, actually, now that project is complete. And so I'll bring it up, Jonathan.
Thank you.
You've just emailed operations. Congratulations.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks.
Arno is back if you wanted to ask the question again about if the TAC heard about it.
Arno.
Yeah,
Wait, where's Arno?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Yeah. Did the TAC ever get communicated about? So when the OpenSSF was originally set up, there were these security repository config.yaml files, the ones that like let anybody configure their permissions on their working group from a file. It was in, let's see, it was settings.yaml. The is that ringing any bells?
No, but there was during. I know
So-
early on there was an attempt to set things up, but it was never followed up on.
So someone went through and configured these across. So all the working groups, like, settings.yaml, right? And it gives, user whose collaborators, like what labels are set up, right? So it lets you configure the repository from a YAML file. So if you wanted to change the repository, you didn't need to be an admin on the repository. You could just push things to this file. Is that ringing any bells?
Yeah, so I if I'm remembering correctly, I actually had submitted a pull request to update the one for the TAC repo, and that pull request was ignored for the longest time, and I got tired and just closed it after a while.
Yes, that yeah. So one of the things
But in any case, that was just for the TAC repo. As far as I know, the TAC never took on to audit these things across the board for all the different repos. So
this plugin was applied across the entire organization. And I was digging into this plugin because I was curious about it and how it worked. And because of how this thing works, you can configure who's an admin on the repository from this config file. And that meant that anybody who had push access to this file could make themselves an admin for the repository and then privilege escalate into controlling the repository. So because of that, I sent an email to, is the reason that the security@openssf.org email got created. And they disabled that GitHub plugin for the entire organization because it let anybody privilege escalate if you would write permissions. So these are still across the org. I don't know, maybe this is a conversation to have with the TAC whenever the next TAC meeting is. But this thing that was being used to let any working group manage itself is now not possible, or manage its own repository with these permissions in this file is not possible anymore. So
I believe Jory might know the story behind this. I have a recollection she knew about those.
interesting.
But
I can ping Jory. Jory's not under the OpenSSF anymore, but I will. That's a good lead to pull on that I had not thought of.
I also had an exchange with Jordan about that file. Jordan Harband.
Yes, Jordan's doing the how recently was that?
Very like when we set up the memory safety SIG.
Which
so
was how long ago?
A month ago.
Oh, what was the topic? What was the topic about in particular? Was it, hey, what do you want for this file, or was it?
He didn't really like that I put myself as the admin for that memory safety SIG when I set that up.
Okay. So that file, as of,
I think he knows what it does.
Yeah, as of a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago, it doesn't do anything currently. I don't think that the file does anything because it got yanked. Oh, is this, you know what's probably happening? That file's probably getting added everywhere. Yeah, this is where it's coming from. Oh, that's where it's coming
template.
From the template, yeah.
Yeah, it's coming from the template. That's why. Okay, so people are still assuming that this thing is the base. Okay, so we should have a conversation with the TAC / somebody about how, what problem we're trying to solve, and do we want to yank this from the template given that it's not usable anymore. So, okay. We've deviated heavily from the topic of this intended meeting working group, but this has been a helpful call. So thank you for humoring me on this one.
Glad to help. All right, I'll make one last call then for anyone who has any topics that they would like to bring up or discuss. Otherwise, we can probably wrap up today's meeting and hopefully next time we'll have a better agenda in place at the beginning and a little bit more structure to the conversation. But I think this is good. We talked about some good stuff and we helped Jonathan figure out his problem, which is always a good thing. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Cheers. Bye.